Done. Okay, what we're going to be doing today is we have to step back a bit um, from we have to step back a bit from the chapter to go, hey Ilanit, to get some background on the laws of Muktzeh. So what we're going to do is let's just bring up the text here a second. Okay, so we're learning Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, chapter 88. Last week we did the first two laws of Muktzeh that covered the question of um, uh, um, what's the definition of Muktzeh. We spoke about foods, etc. If you can eat them, if you can't eat them, if they're, for instance, raw meats. I want to cover all these topics. I just want let's do one law here, and then we're gonna go through some background on Muktzeh. So it says like this: Machal shuhu. So we're 88 law 3. Machal shuhu aser b'chila umutarana. You have foods that are prohibited to eat. Let's say non-kosher foods, for instance, but you're allowed to have enough of it. I mean, certain foods that are non-kosher or not permissible are also you're not allowed to take any benefit from it. But there's certain foods that are not kosher, not permissible to eat, but you are allowed to take benefit from it. And a non-Jew it's fit for them to eat it as is. Kegain, for instance, basar mevushal v'kadaima. Let's say non-kosher meat that's been cooked, so it's ready to be eaten. You can give it, he's able to give it to a non-Jew since it's yours to give. So you could do with it as you please. So is it permissible to move that, to carry that on Shabbos? So he says, mutter taltalai. So though there's no use for you, but you have the ability to give it to someone else, that you have you could take a no from it, and the no is by giving it to someone else. So then you're allowed to carry it. What about if it's not usable for non-Jew as is? What would be the example? Basar chai, raw meat. It means the Gentile can eat it as is. The gam the He said, 1 second, but it's not good for Gentiles. But maybe it'd be good for animals, for dogs. But it's not. Why? Because there's nothing wrong with the meat. You would never give this meat to a dog because it's a quality piece of meat. Even Shirai Lein Yehudi, because it's someone else, you would give it to a human first. So therefore, you can't say it's good that that dog who does eat raw meat. It's so therefore you're able to use it to move it because it has a use. So it doesn't have use because it's quality meat, so you wouldn't give it to an animal. At the same time, it's not available for the Gentile because it's not cooked. Or there could be another situation. It's not raw meat. It's just not yours. Ella shalacha belongs to someone else. Then it's asr taltlei. Then it falls under the laws of muktzah. Okay, so I'm going to do the footnote here, which is footnote number 12, and then I want to jump to some background information about muktzah. I'm sure everyone knows this, but it's good to refresh it, especially if we're learning the laws of muktzah on Shabbos. So he says, since it's yours, so you could give it to the Gentile. However, food from which you are forbidden to derive any benefit whatsoever. What about food that's asr bahana? He gives an example: chametz on Pesach. So chametz on Pesach are you allowed? Is it muktzeh? I'm not going to go into shaila of what the chametz is doing, but if it's chametz on Pesach, you're not allowed to take any enough from this food. You're not allowed to have any pleasure from chametz on Pesach or meat that was cooked with milk. There's a difference between non-kosher meat, which is an avela, which you're allowed to sell and take hana. Take hana from meat and milk that was cooked together. So let's say kosher meat and milk were cooked together. So it's basar b'chalav. You're not allowed to have enough of it. So their muktzeh may not be handled according to the Mishnah Brura, even if it's yours to give to the Gentile, who would have no problem eating that if in theory, but you're not allowed to take enough of it. So therefore, on Shabbos, it's considered muktzeh. Okay, we have a few things to go over. The number one question that we spoke about last week was about the question about about moving raw meat on Shabbos in your fridge, right? If you have a piece of steak, it's kosher, you want to eat it, it's just you don't want to eat it now. So does that meat become, are you allowed to move that? Is that muktzeh on Shabbos? And we're going to also, so before we get to all that, we have to get the categories of muktzeh, and then we can start asking more questions about the details. So let's go over Chabad.org did a very nice piece on muktzeh. I'm going to go through it slowly. Let's first start with the background. What is muktzeh? Muktzeh refers to items that may not be removed or handled on Shabbos, the Jewish day of rest. One of the most famous Shabbos-related rabbinical injunctions is muktzeh was instituted to preserve the state and restfulness of the sacred day. So now we understand what's the idea of muktzeh. Muktzeh was created, and when we get the background, because there was a lack of Shabbos observance. I mean, muktzeh is a rabbinic prohibition, and it was instituted because and directly connected with people's observance of the day of rest. The laws of muktzeh are codified in the code of the Jewish law in the laws of Shabbos. Okay, that we've just learned. In the laws of Shabbos, you can find laws of muktzeh. What's the history of muktzeh? In the year 3426 from creation, which is 335 BCE, which is the beginning of the Second Temple's time. 14 years after the Second Temple was built, Nehemiah received authority from the Persian king to become governor over the Jews in Jerusalem. Okay. Upon his arrival, you have to remember, so there's Nehemiah and there's Ezra. Nehemiah and Ezra were both the two main personalities that dealt with the second aliyah of the Jewish people coming to Eretz Yisrael to rebuild the Second Temple. And the Second Temple wasn't like the Jewish people entered the land with Joshua. It was much more complicated people involved. There was a long process until we got to the beautiful temple that we know, what's called Herod's Temple. There was many versions of the Second Temple. In the beginning, it was difficult in Eretz Yisrael when they came back in the beginning of the Second Temple, after the destruction of the First Temple. So upon the arrival of Nehemiah, who Nehemiah is and all that is up for conversation. Not now is the time. But he's one of the main Jewish personalities, and he's also a minister of the Persian king. And the Persian king ruled over Eretz Yisrael at the time. Upon arrival, he found the community in miserable conditions, and he worked hard to improve their material and spiritual state. Okay, you can read more about that in the Return of Israel. One of the things that appalled Nehemiah was the commercial activity being carried out on Shabbos. There's a few things that the Jewish people were doing in their observance of Torah mitzvah. One was their non-observance of the Shabbos. Like it's brought down, these quotes in Nehemiah, in those days, I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on Shabbos and bringing stacks of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all types of loads, and bringing them to Jerusalem on the Shabbos day. So they were clearly violating the Shabbos in the times of Nehemiah. To strengthen the observance of Shabbos among the populace, Nehemiah and his colleagues, meaning Ezra and others, there was the members of the Great Assembly, right, instituted that any object not needed for Shabbos use may not be handled on that day. So they went backwards, basically. They looked at people's observance of Shabbos, which was lacking, and the members of the Great Assembly, the Knesset Gdolah under Nehemiah, at the time, said, okay, number one is anything that you don't need in Shabbos cannot be handled. So that's where muktzeh starts from. When Shabbos observance improved, they eased the restrictions somewhat and allowed additional categories of objects to be handled, as well as additional methods of handling. The resulting set of laws remains in effect today, which is the laws of muktzeh. So basically, after they saw that there was some sort of improvement, they put the gedorim, the boundaries, to set for a people's observance of the Shabbos. Okay, so now the reasons for muktzeh, he quotes certain from the texts. He says, since it is forbidden to work on Shabbos, one might utilize the free time to rearrange the items in their home and carry them from one place to another. So it means one of the reasons brought down is not really even an idea of violating the Shabbos, but if a person has free time and they're not going to utilize the day of rest properly, so they're going to say, okay, what could I do today? I could clean up my garage. In contrast to the spirit of Shabbos as a day of rest, which means you're supposed to rest and not rearrange your garage. To avoid such scenarios, the Muktzeh decree was established, and this is brought down in halachas of Shabbos of the Rambam. So the Rambam describes the halachas of Shabbos is So a person should not just sit there because you're not at work and it's a day off. So you're going to use it to just move around things, and therefore you're going to lose the spirit of Shabbos. So we said, don't touch anything you don't need exactly right now for Shabbos. Another quote he quotes, for those who do not work at all, Shabbos may appear equal to any other day of the week. Let's say you're a person who's retired, or for whatever reason you don't have a job. So what's Shabbos any different than any other day? You don't work on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday either. So how are you going to extinguish show Shabbos to distinguish the rest observed on this day from their lack of work, the duration of the week? So Muktzeh was established, which is quoted also by the Maimonides. A second reason is to show that it's not that you're working hard at plowing the field or whatever your job is, and now you're taking a day off. That Shabbos is different than even if you're retired or whatever reason, or in summer vacation. Shabbos is a different day. It's not just another day of vacation. Also, he quotes, Muktzeh was instituted to prevent someone from carrying the items from a private domain to public domain. So now we address not just the question of a challenge to the day of rest, but also for a chashash, that there's a gzeira here. They were concerned that if people are going to be handling things, it's more likely that the person may be, by mistake, b'shoigig, or maybe chas v'shalom b'mezid, end up carrying things outside in the public domain, from private domain to public domain. That's a violation of the Shabbos. An activity forbidden by Shabbos. This he quotes from the Raved on the Ravid on Maimonides. He also quotes the sages restrict the handling of items whose primary function is for an activity forbidden on Shabbos, in other words, pen, to prevent a person from performing that activity, in other words, writing. So we find this is quoted from also the Maimonides, that he quotes. Another reason is that the reason why with certain things, let's say a pen, why can't you hold a pen on Shabbos? You have to remember something. I'm sure, and maybe others have experienced this in their tshuva or conversion process, but the laws of Muktzeh is not regular for a person. You tell someone about certain laws of Torah, okay, I understand. What is this whole idea of Shabbos? You have a day of rest. You have a day of rest. Relax. Go to shul, daven. What's this? All these details. Don't pick up a pen. I can't touch a pen. Doesn't make sense. So the Rambam says a pen is a menuchah that's used for forbidden work. You're not allowed to write on Shabbos. So why can't you pick up the pen? Because the concern is if you pick up the pen, you may write on Shabbos. Just like if you're handling things that are not necessary, you're not going to be so conscious about them, and therefore there's going to be other possibilities of carrying. So basically, what we're seeing from the laws of Muktzeh is there's two basic fields here that we quoted. One was the idea of preventing a person from just being casual on Shabbos. It means not that we're concerned, not so much the concern of violating the Shabbos, but violating the spirit of Shabbos, which is a day of rest, by just being able to do too many things. So we cut down your ability to do things, so you should focus on the rest. Don't rearrange your yard or your garage or your cupboards. Those are things you don't need right now. Just focus on rest. The other question is, maybe that person is going to be handling too many things, so there's going to be a possibility of the violation of Shabbos, carrying, writing. And so you have to remember, so the laws of Muktzeh in this case come into two plays. One is by not handling things, it's less likely you're going to carry them. But also the very fact that there's restrictions, that a person, it's already pre-programmed into the person to know that any time you're about to touch anything, you have to ask yourself, am I allowed to touch this now on Shabbos? So that brings a Shabbos awareness constantly. And therefore, it's less likely for you to violate the Shabbos, whether it's writing or carrying, because you're constantly conscious of Shabbos, because you're careful of everything you touch. Okay, so that's where Muktzeh comes from, starting from Nehemiah, basically, starting from the Second Temple. There was the Bris Hamana. We know that when Ezra came to Eretz Yisrael in the second, there was like a total reprogramming of the Jewish people. The destruction of the first temple had such an effect, and the later years of the first temple had such an effect on the Jewish people that they needed Ramish to reprogram themselves. So Ezra and Nehemiah reprogrammed. It was almost like a whole new start for the Jewish people. There was a covenant that Ezra made. There was the laws of intermarriage and Shabbos. All these things that a lot of the things that were instituted by the members of the Great Assembly. One of them is the laws of the principles of Muktzeh. So now, what is muktzeh? What is defined as muktzeh? What is it? What does it mean? Things. What does it mean? You can't touch things. What things can't you touch? What falls under the categories of muktzeh? So now I'm going to go into it. It should be noted that the laws of muktzeh are quite detailed and can only be properly grasped through studying the relevant sections of the Code of Jewish Law. Hold on, Rebecca. Read the laws in depth in Shabbos in chapters 308 to 313. This is a very important point. Laws of muktzeh are not basic. It's very difficult, and we're going to go through them in the Kitzur much in short pen. But it's not so clear what can and cannot be touched and in what situations. Yes, Rebecca.
I just want to make sure I understand what you just said before. So the technical definition of muktzah is anything that you do not need for a like a purpose that's allowed on Shabbos.
Yeah, that's what we're going to go down to. And it's going to be broken down into categories. There's kalim, like things that means there's things that are tools, and there's things that are things. Like food is not a tool. You can't use the food for anything. You could use a hammer as a tool for doing something that's permissible in theory on Shabbos. You're not allowed to knock a nail in. So we're going to go through, yes, but in principle, you're correct. That's exactly it. I
But
mean,
what about like a mirror? Like if I don't need it right now, is it muktzah to like touch it and move it out of
yes,
my way or something?
it's out of your ways is tzarich mekayimai. That's you have to
Okay.
have all the rules of muksa. Needing space or needing it for something else, or if to move it so someone in your house shouldn't drop it and break it, or you shouldn't break it. That's chasar kis. You want to make sure that it doesn't get damaged, or it doesn't get
Or
stolen.
like pushing in a chair that you're not gonna sit in or
Okay,
something.
okay, so that
Like,
so
is that muktzah?
that's a question of doing things that are not restful, doing things that have no purpose, pushing in a chair to have the table the room set looking normal. That's part of owning Shabbos.
Okay, got it. Thank
But yeah,
you.
but it all centers around how your observance of Shabbos.
Mhm.
At the core of it, if you want to bring it down to the core, it's really to bring a heightened awareness of Shabbos, both the idea of the positive of Shabbos, which is the day of rest, to have a proper day of rest, and not to do and the prohibitions of Shabbos, not to get into a situation that you may end up b'shoigig or even chas v'shalom b'mezid, do
Mhm.
violating Shabbos. So
And
it's all
what year did you say this was like?
He says Nehemiah did this in 335 BCE or 3426 to creation.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, so he says number one is, and therefore, whenever in doubt, please consult your Orthodox rabbi, because it's not simple what is muktzah, what is not muktzah. Not all muktzah items are subject to the same rules. Let's see over here what he's in. I'm going to go through the footnotes here. He says here we're taking is the laws of this section are taken from the Shulchan Aruch Harav. There's obviously different opinions. We're going according to the Alter Rebbe as Chabad Chassidim. This is Chabad.org. When determining whether a given object may be handled on Shabbos, two questions must be asked. First, what type of item is it? Second, why is it being handled? Like you asked the question about moving the chair. Again, that very fact that question shoots through your brain on Shabbos is already an accomplishment of Nehemiah. Meaning to say that you don't just handle things. People just touch things the whole time. So no, you don't always touch things. So therefore, what is the idea of the day of rest? I think he says something beautiful before, and when he talks about the day of rest, in the footnote he says, I saw somewhere. Hold on a second. Is it here? There's a footnote I think I saw. Maybe it's in the Pnim before. Here he quotes that about the question of Nehemiah, the Talmud Tractate Shabbos 123b. Certain elements of Muktzah decrees were effected centuries earlier in the days of Kings David and Solomon, and perhaps even earlier. Okay, so there were some ideas of Muktzah before Nehemiah, but the basic structure of Muktzah seems to have come from Nehemiah. I saw before. I have to maybe check that where I saw before. So I saw somewhere. It brings down that people are not programmed to rest. Rest is a chiddush. To be restful is a chiddush. We take it for granted that what does it mean to be restful? Restful, if you think about it, everything we do, we're always moving. Even vacation, you're moving, you're doing things. To be restful is not regular. So the number one thing, the very fact that a person is going to ask themselves these two questions of what type of item is it and why is it being handled, that already is an accomplishment of an awareness of Muktzeh, of Shabbos. That we don't just touch things, because we're always touching things. So you have to ask yourself, you look at something, what is it that I'm about to touch? And what is it used for? So he says this, the items that fall under the restrictions of the Muktzeh are divided into various categories, each one subject to different laws. Depending what it is, defines its rules. The following are the three most comprehensive groups. One group is set apart due to prohibited use. Why is it Muktzeh? Muktzeh means set apart, because its use is prohibited. An item or a utensil whose primary function, the Douglas over here is primary. Why? Because you could use a primary function of a knife is to cut your food. You know, if you're an Orthodox Jewish house, it could also be used as a screwdriver. So it doesn't mean that although you're not allowed to use a screwdriver on Shabbos, but the butter knife is its main function is its primary use is for food. So here it says, what is its primary function? Is for an activity forbidden on Shabbos. In other words, writing instruments, tools, appliances. So although you could use it for anything, you could use it as to hold the books down. I mean, not every its primary use is forbidden, doesn't mean that all its uses are forbidden. That's number one. So it's a muktzeh that's set aside because its menuchah is its main use is prohibited. Number two is set apart due to value. What does it mean set apart due to value? An expensive item or utensil whose primary function is for an activity forbidden on Shabbos. It means it's something that is primary is activities forbidden on Shabbos. I mean, your ring could be very expensive, but it doesn't have a function that's forbidden on Shabbos. Its primary use function is forbidden on Shabbos, and it has chasar kis. So therefore, you wouldn't, for instance, when we're going to learn about that, you could use maybe number one, let's say a hammer to crack the nuts on Shabbos. So that itself is not its primary use, but what you're using it for is what something you're for eichel nefesh. You're using it for your food. However, you have sometimes an expensive item that is your candelabra. You're not going to use to crack nuts because it's made out of silver or something expensive or something delicate. You're not going to use it for something else. So its primary use is forbidden on Shabbos, and it has a chasar kis. It's expensive, so you wouldn't use it for something else. That one is careful. Never. There again. Here's the dogish is to never, because of its value. We hopefully never use your iPhone to try to open up a peanut, right? So used for anything other than its specific function because of its value. So as to ensure its value will not decrease. In other words, expensive musical instruments and expensive electronics, right? Your guitar, you're not going to use for something other than playing music. So that's called its use is prohibited. Its primary use is prohibited, and because of its value, you wouldn't use it as for something else. Unlike group number one, which is use is prohibited, but you don't. It's not a valuable thing. It's not an expensive article. Group number three is set apart by its very definition. What does it mean? It's set apart by its very definition, which means muktzeh machmas gufoi. It itself is muktzeh, an object or substance that has no inherent function and is not an instrument or tool. It's not a tool. It's not a keli. In other words, rocks, money, lumber, vegetation, soil, inedible food, animals. Okay, that's all. It's not a keli. Itself has no. It's not. It's by itself. It's defined as something you don't need to use. You're not going to pick. You don't have. Therefore, you have no use to pick up a bucket of dirt. Why? Because on Shabbos you shouldn't be doing it. Not that you never use it. Now, again, about the animals, touching animals. So over here in general, animals are in the category of muktzeh machmas gufay. We've studied before about the question about, like he says over here, read more. How does Shabbos observance affect pet owners? Where there's the opinion that you can touch and hug your private pet of a dog or a cat, if that gives you comfort, then it's not considered muktzeh according to some opinions. But in general, animals are muktzeh. And therefore, when we talked about the laws of saddling your horse, the problem is if you're going to move the horse when you do it, and how much you're going to be leaning on the horse could affect your ability to touch it. Yes, Barbara. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was trying to get myself muted. So say you go to the zoo and you're there at the zoo and you're walking through and you see the animals. Can you feed the animals at the zoo? Or would that be considered muktzah you're carrying?
Now
If you
there'd be many problems in that scenario. But let's talk about the scenario where you wouldn't have to carry money. You could just walk into the zoo. So you're not going to have any of those problems. You're not, you wouldn't be violating the Shabbos in your entry into the zoo. Or you're in a farm for Shabbos. When you go to places today where there's farm animals, that we learned about the questions of if you're allowed to feed animals in general. That's a question. If it's your animal, then you have to feed it. You have to feed your animal. Stray animals, there's opinions that you can feed stray dogs, and Hashem is happy feed stray dogs. But pigeons, for instance, you cannot feed because pigeons find their own food. So the question of feeding animals is a separate question. But the question of handling animals, pet and zoo animals, if it's not related to your care for them, that's permissible on Shabbos, then they are muktzeh. Yes, you cannot touch them. To go to a petting zoo and pet the goats and the rabbits is prohibited on Shabbos.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. When there is a leniency for pet owners is only for their animals, for their pets. So which would be a good question about if you go to a house of someone. Again, we discussed in the previous classes about pet owners' relationship to animals on Shabbos, but in theory, based on just the text, to go into someone else's house where it's not your pet and to handle someone else's pet is maybe more questionable there than, let's say, the leniencies for handling your own pet. Additionally, non-Muktzeh entities are also divided into two categories. So what's non-Muktzeh entity? So we define what's Muktzeh. So Muktzeh is the two parts is that the primary use is prohibited on Shabbos. One is that it's an expensive item. The other one is just a regular item. And the third is something that its own has no use on Shabbos at all, which is the rocks, money, lumber, etc. It's not a vessel, so you can't use it for something else. Then it is Muktzeh machmas gufay. It itself is Muktzeh. Additionally, non-Muktzeh entities are also divided into two categories: items or utensils whose primary function is for an activity permissible on Shabbos. In other words, your cutlery, right? Your forks and knives, you're allowed to use it on Shabbos. Other things are foods and liquids, books and people that you are allowed to use on Shabbos. So those are two categories where there's utensils for Shabbos use and things that themselves are used on Shabbos, like food. So food that is not kosher or not permissible would fall under muktzeh machmas gufay. So the question of moving a piece of meat on Shabbos, raw meat, is if it's raw and you can't eat it, so it has no use on Shabbos. So then it becomes muktzeh machmas gufay, it becomes like a pile of dirt. Okay. Now, next thing is purpose of handling. The motive why a given item is being handled also plays a role in determining if and how it may be moved. With regard to muktzeh, there are 4 reasons why an item can be handled. Okay, number 1 is to use the object for an activity permissible on Shabbos. Okay, you want to pick up your fork to eat, so its use and its purpose is for something permissible. You're allowed to eat on Shabbos, so you're allowed to pick up your fork on Shabbos. With it, a cup to drink from, a hammer to crack open nuts. So if you have a nut cracker, so if you're allowed to crack open nuts on Shabbos, so the hammer's use is permissible on Shabbos. To use the place where the item was lying. So this is the question that Rebecca asked. I have something that I don't want, but I needed space. So to use a place where the item was lying, muksma machmas makayim. You want to move it because of its place. Its place is taking up space. In other words, to move an item lying on the chair for the purpose of sitting there. Number 2 is to protect the item. In other words, to remove it it from a place where it may be subject to damage or theft. So this is the question: you left your iPhone out on Shabbos. It's off, so you're not going to turn it on. There's no concern that by moving it you may turn on the phone, but maybe someone's going to pocket it. So are you allowed to pick it up and move it because you're scared it's going to be stolen? Another reason for moving something is for no need at all. In other words, toying with a fork. Can you just toy with a fork on Shabbos? The following chart delineates the basic principles that apply to the above mentioned 5 categories of objects. 1, 2, 3, 4. not 4 items or 5 items. Let's see. Okay. The purpose of handling the object. Muktzeh due to prohibited use. So something that's muktzeh because it's a machmas iser. Whatever it's used for is to do something prohibited. So, sorry, for prohibited use, not machmas iser. It's used like a fork. To use the item, you're allowed. To use the item's location, of course, you're allowed. Muktzeh due to prohibited use. So muktzeh is to use the item, you could use it. Okay, so you didn't go into the law. If you want to use the item for something else, why did you skip that rule? Okay, so in this item, set aside for the prohibited use, the use itself is prohibited. You're not allowed to use it for something prohibited. But if you want to use it for something, to use it for something else, let's say to not open the nuts, right? So then you're allowed to. To use the item's location to move it because it's taking up location, you're allowed to. To protect an item that has, just because if it's prohibited, you're not allowed to move it just to protect the item. For no need at all, you're not allowed to move it. Okay. Muktzeh due to value. So to use the item, you're not allowed to. Why? Because you would never use it for something that's not its primary use. To use its location, you're not allowed to because it has no reason to pick up. So that's would come to the question of moving an iPhone. To protect the item, you're not allowed to. And for no need at all, obviously, you're not allowed to. So here he says, something that's muktzeh machmas chasar kis, which we're going to learn about in the next few laws, is you're not allowed to use it for to use the item at all, to use it to move it for its location, to protect the item, and for no need at all. So this covers the first two categories of muktzeh of prohibited use, one with no major value and the other one with major value. So if it has no major value, if you want to use a hammer to open nuts on Shabbos, is allowed to use the item's location because it's not a chasar and kis, and it's already, therefore you're allowed to, you have a reason to handle it. If it's not its primary use, then you could already move it for its space. To protect the item, you're not allowed to, or for no need at all, you're not allowed to. Something that has value, you're not allowed to move at all, not for its use, obviously not for its location, not to protect it, and not obviously for no need at all. Muktzeh by definition, which would be muktzeh machas gufay. Again, to use it at all, it has no use, and it's not a keli. So therefore, you can't use it for anything. So to pick up a pile of wood to use the item, you're not allowed to. Its location, you're not allowed to. Protect the item, you're not allowed to. And no need at all, obviously, you're not allowed to. It's used for permissible activities like a fork. Obviously, to use its item, you're allowed to. To use its location, to use the item's location, you're allowed to. To protect the item, you're allowed to. For no need at all, to pick up just a fork. So your question about moving the chair for no reason is not allowed on the chair. Is not a keli because that's part of your setup of the house. But just a toy with a fork is not allowed on Shabbos. Food, books, and people, which are permissible. So then you can use the item. You could use the item's location, you could protect the item, and you can use it for no need at all. You can pick up Sfarim if you want, you don't have to have a specific reason. Food, you don't have to think, should I pick up this piece of apple now? I just want to hold the apple in my hand. So you're allowed to do that, that's not a problem. Okay, he doesn't, in this chart, we're not learning the reasons yet. He's just giving us the structure. I just want to say that, okay, on this falls, that's why he's saying it's very detailed. Like, if an iPhone is muktzeh and it has no use outside its primary use, it means even though you can use it outside its primary use, but you wouldn't because you damage the vulnerability. It's a vulnerable item, and so here you're not allowed to use it even for stolen to move. Now there's obviously different ways. We're talking about picking it up and putting it down, but there's obviously the ways with your feet, klach or yad. But just straight up to pick up your phone on Shabbos and put it in the drawer is not allowed on Shabbos because you wouldn't use it for anything else, as far as I know. Additional laws. The restrictions of muktzeh specifically applies to moving a muktzeh item. By contrast, you may touch a muktzeh item if doing so will not cause it to move. In other words, what about a car? So a car is primary, or you're only going to use it for driving, which is prohibited on Shabbos. Can you touch a car on Shabbos? Or a tree trunk, you can't move it, they're too heavy to move. Similarly, you may sit on top of a muktzeh item place a non-muktzeh item on top of a muktzeh item. If you're walking outside in a place where there's an Erev, could you put your cup on the top of a car? Yes. Or remove it from or remove it from upon it that was on let's say a car, provided the muktzeh item does not move as a result. So if it moves it, the car or a motorcycle, which is is easier to move, would be questionable. Footnote number 8. Shulchan Aruch Rav 308:14. Sitting upon a muktzeh item is permitted even if doing so will cause it to move, as the movement is not being caused by one's hand, see below. So if you sit down on a car, right? If someone sits down on a car, on the front of a car, the car could kind of shake, right? The car will shake the shocks, but you're not moving with your hand, you're moving with your weight. So the Alter Rebbe permits that. Moreover, moving a muktzeh item is only prohibited if it is done with one's hands. You may, however, move muktzeh items with your feet. Body, elbow. So you could elbow your phone, again, if it's off, you could elbow your phone into a drawer and the like, or by blowing it, if it's something that you could blow. He quotes Shulchan Aruch Rav 308:15. So that's the idea of kalach yad. To pick up your phone with your hand that's turned off and put it in your drawer on Shabbos, not allowed, but there's other ways to move it. If a muktzeh item was placed upon a non-muktzeh item before Shabbos and remained there at the onset of Shabbos, in other words, a candelabra on a table. This is why people have to be careful. A lot of us have the minhag to light our Shabbos candles on our table. The problem is this comes under the law of basis l'davar aser. The table becomes the basis, the support of the prohibited article, which in this case is the candelabra, which is used to light candles on Shabbos. If you light the candles on Shabbos without anything that's balancing that making it, it could be also a basis to something prohibited, permissible. So then it could become a problem that the table now becomes unmovable like the candelabra. The non-muktzeh item receives the same status as the muktzeh item and may not be moved for the duration of that Shabbos. This is true even if the muktzeh item subsequently was removed or fell off. So let's say the candelabra fell off or whatever, someone moved it. But when the Shabbos came in, it was a support to something that is prohibited on Shabbos, that can't be moved on Shabbos. So that table now becomes prohibited to be moved on Shabbos. And we're going to learn the laws of how do we avoid that, because everyone likes to have Shabbos candles on our table. At the same time, we want to have the option to move our table, and especially to if you want to move it or pick it up. So you don't want it to be a basis l'davar aser. However, this principle does not apply if any of the following scenarios. If we're planning to remove the muktzeh item before Shabbos, but forgot to do so. Okay, so if you made a mistake, you didn't plan on leaving that item on your table, you left it by mistake, and you forgot about it, so then it's not muktzeh. If but lighting the candles doesn't apply because you're lighting the Shabbos candles to remain there on Shabbos. If the muktzeh item was not placed there for a specific purpose, in other words, muktzeh items lying on top of non-muktzeh items at random in a drawer. Okay, so here the question is, for instance, if you put I do this. I leave my phone on Shabbos in my underwear drawer or my clothing drawer, right? So now the drawer becomes something I can't move on Shabbos. So he says no, because it's something that's kind of random. It's like there's no purpose for it. So if it happens there by random, I'm not sure if that in my case would apply because I do put it there for a purpose. But for no specific purpose, just randomly, then it's also not a problem. But the Shabbos candle, there's some people who used to have the custom, remember, that they light the Shabbos candles on the table and the husband moves it off before Shabbos, or the man in the house would move it off before Shabbos. So it's lit on the table, it's taken off the table, so the Shabbos doesn't come in with the candles on the table. If the onset of Shabbos, the non-muktzeh was simultaneously supporting another non-muktzeh item of greater value than the muktzeh item. In other words, a table supporting a box of matches along with a silver goblet. So the goblet's more important than the matches. So if the matches were placed specifically on a table and you also have a goblet, so then it's no reason why it should fall under, so to say, the rules of the matches over the more expensive item, which would be a silver goblet. The question is candles. The candlesticks are expensive. Shulchan Aruch Rav. If any of these three scenarios, the non-muktzeh item may be, in any of these three scenarios, the non-muktzeh item may be moved, meaning the table, as an example, even though the muktzeh item is indirectly being moved along with it. However, if possible, the muktzeh item should first be shaken off, if that's possible. Shulchan Aruch Raf 3194. Additionally, the non-muktzeh may not be moved if your intent is to protect or use the muktzeh item. It means if you're moving the table, so no one should take your phone is different than if you're moving the table because you want to move it to another location. Okay. Conversely, a muktzeh item may not be transported by placing a non-muktzeh item on top of it. Meaning to say, a muktzeh item may not be transported by placing a non-muktzeh item on top of it. Similarly, a muktzeh item may not be removed directly via a non-muktzeh item. In other words, removing inedible shells from a table with a knife. A repulsive muktzeh item that is found in one's living quarters may be removed or disposed, for instance, dirty diapers. A muktzeh item that might pose a physical danger to the public, which we learned about last week, broken glass in an area where people are walking, may be removed. The laws of muktzeh equally apply to Yom Tif, and Yom Tif, in fact, there is additional restrictions on Yom Tif that does not exist on Shabbos. An item or utensil that receives a new type of function on Yom Tov should not be handled, while if this occurs on Shabbos, it may be handled. He gives an example in footnote number 20, Shulchan Aruch Harav. For example, a water pitcher cracked on Yom Tov and can no longer be used to contain water, but it can use to hold fruits, both of them permissible, since its original function has been replaced with a new one on Yom Tov, which is Noiled. It is reborn as a new item. It may not be handled on Yom Tif. However, if it cracked on Shabbos, it may be handled. So the pitcher that breaks on Shabbos could be used as a bowl on Shabbos, but it cannot be used as a bowl on the Yom Tif. Okay, let's just finish off this and go to try to get some laws. True rest. At first glance, it may. Oh, this is where I saw it. At first glance, it may appear that muktzeh, along with all the other Shabbos restrictions, inhibit our ability to relax and enjoy the day. It's very stressful, right? We're just trying, how do we keep the Shabbos? What are we allowed to do? Why so many don'ts? Why not just focus on the beautiful ritual and restful atmosphere? Why can't we just say Shabbos is a day of rest? And we go to shul, and we eat kugel, and we eat cholent, and we sit together with friends. Why do you have to have all these, I can touch my pen, I can't touch my pen, my table, the candles are on the table, off the table. Now we're gonna, we have to see if it becomes basis to Davar Kaddish, If you put the chalas, one of the ideas is if you put the chalas on Shabbos on the table before the candelabra, so then the table becomes first the support to the chalas before it becomes the support to the candles, and then you could move it. Or there's other ways if you put a sefer. Okay, rest is the most unnatural phenomenon in the universe. The universe existence itself is a giant perpetual motion machine. Everything in it, from the galaxies to atoms, is constantly on the move. Earning a living is work. Running a home is work. Even vacationing is work. Rest is a divine gift. That's what we say, that Hashem gave us a gift on Shabbos. If God had not created the seventh day, there would be no such thing as rest. He quotes this from the Rashi in Genesis. Even now, true rest is an elusive commodity, obtainable only via the Shabbos experience. And the experience of Shabbos, to experience the Shabbos rest, we need to cease work. That is, cease all activities involvement with our world, opening ourselves up to Shabbos rest. And therefore, the idea of Muktzeh, like it says in the beginning of this article, was that Nehemiah saw the people were not in Oinik Shabbos, they weren't doing menuchah on Shabbos, and the rest is difficult. And the idea to totally close off and focus on a day of rest, on family and study and learning, on just enjoying the menuchah itself. Shabbos, the mitzvah, is the rest itself. Taking a nap is when we these restrictions, closing down our life for a day, and that involves, and it's helped by the restrictions of Shabbos, the restrictions of Muktzeh. And here you finish off the picture, a person just lying on the couch relaxing. Okay, so I just want to bring a few more questions before we go to, if we do a halacha. I wanted to start with a halacha, just so we should, in case we don't learn one. The question about the status of meat or fish. Now, fish and meat are a lot of questions. We have a question of fish. For instance, today people eat raw fish and sushi, and people eat raw meats. So the question is like this: may one remove raw meat and fish on Shabbos? We're not talking about non-kosher meat. We're talking about you have a fridge, that has kosher meat and fish, and can you move it? We said before, if you remember correctly, in our chart over here, we said that muktzeh, that is muktzeh by definition, machmas gufay, and raw meat and raw fish is muktzeh by definition because it has no use. You can't use the item, you can't use its location, you can't protect the item, you can't use it for no use at all. So can you move the steak that's taking up space in your fridge? So he says like this. The question is, this is from Rabbi Avad Yosef. It's not, this is the opinion of Ravad Yosef. It's not the opinion of other, even Sephardic authorities like the Ben Ish Chai. Answer. In the previous halacha, we have discussed the primary laws of prohibition and muktzeh on Shabbos, which refers to certain objects that our sages prohibit moving on Shabbos. Food items which are edible on Shabbos may be moved, and they're not considered muktzeh. The primary law regarding moving raw meat. The Gemara Masechtas Shabbos 128a states that raw meat may be moved on Shabbos. Why? For although meat is not usually eaten uncooked, and we have previously established that foods that are inedible on Shabbos, such as dough, right? You cannot eat dough. And baking powder, right? If you have baking powder in your fridge, may not be moved on Shabbos since they are considered in et muktzeh. They're muktzeh machmas gufay, like rocks and dirt. It's no different. Nevertheless, since during all the times of our sages, there were certain individuals who would, in fact, eat raw meat, it is not considered an et muktzeh. It's not muktzeh machmas gufay, and it may be moved on Shabbos just like any other items that are food. So, because there are some people that eat raw meat doesn't fall under the category of muktzeh machmas gufay. Raw unsalted meat is permissible to eat, even if the meat has not been salted, meaning halachically made available to eat on Shabbos, because of you can't eat meat until it's been salted, as prescribed by halacha, and it's fully blood and it's full of blood, which it has not yet released. Nevertheless, it may still be moved on Shabbos. Why? For the letter of the law dictates that one may eat raw meat before it has been salted, since blood, which is still absorbed inside the meat, is not prohibited for consumption, only through cooking, which causes the blood to exit the meat. So if you can eat it raw, it doesn't fall into the same problem. Will blood be prohibited for consumption if it is for this reason that meat must be salted before cooking? However, if the meat is raw, as long as it has been washed thoroughly and there is no blood on the outer surface, it may be eaten as is without any salting necessary. So therefore, the fact that it's not salted still doesn't make it muktzeh on Shabbos. However, Rabbeinu Yosef Chaim writes in the Sefer Ben Ish Chai that nowadays raw meat should not be moved on Shabbos, since no one eats raw meat anymore, and is thus retains the halachic status of rocks and dirt. It becomes muktzeh machmas gufay, which may not be moved even for their own use or the use of their place. Many great achronim, including the Aruch HaShulchan, the Igros Moshe, Hagoyin Harav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and others rule likewise. So if you're going according to Harav Moshe Feinstein, or Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, their opinion is one may not move raw meat on Shabbos, even for its location. So if you need to reorganize your fridge, you want to put your soup back into the fridge on Shabbos, Friday night, and there's a piece of meat sitting there that you need to move it in order to put the soup down, you must organize it. If you're going in the opinion of Rav Moshe Feinstein, or Rav Moshe Feinstein, or Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which follow the ruling of the Ben Ish Chai, it may not be moved. Nevertheless, Hagon Rav Yaakov di Biton, in his responsa Edut B'Yaakov, disputes this and writes that since our sages have ruled that raw meat does not retain a muktzeh status, and it is impossible to say that there is nobody in the world who eats raw meat, it will be in fact permissible to move it on the Shabbos and the halacha in the times of the Talmud, as it was in the times of the Talmud. Similarly, Baron Rabbeinu Avad Yosef writes in the Sefer Hilchos Olam that the letter of the law follows this more lenient view. Okay, so therefore I'm going to stop here. Let's go to fish in a second. If you're following the teachings of the rulings of Rav Avad Yosef, he follows the rulings that you can move it, whereas the opinion of seemingly the Ashkenazic, the Ben Ish Chai, was also Sfard, but in the other Ashkenazic rulings of Rav Moshe Feinstein or Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is, like the Ben Ish Chai, that you should not move raw meat. Regarding raw fish, which cannot be eaten raw, means that it wouldn't be used for sushi. Maran Shulchan Aruch rules that raw fish may not be moved on Shabbos since it's inedible. Maran Zatzal rules likewise that only salted fish, which is edible, may be moved on Shabbos. Sushi or lox obviously is not included. However, raw fish may not be moved. Nevertheless, in our times, when it is common to eat salmon and other forms of raw fish in different forms of Asian cuisine, like sushi, it will be permissible to move such fish on Shabbos, similar to the law regarding raw meat. Okay, so because today people do eat certain raw fishes like sushi, and they're like salmon for sushi or tuna, so picking up a piece of salmon that's in your fridge for Sunday night or Saturday night that's not edible today or not cookable today, and you're not using it for sushi use, but because it does have a use, so then it would be similar to meat. And it could even be that this would be according to even Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, because they argue that no one eats raw meat today, but people do eat raw fish. That's obvious, and a good percentage of people eat sushi. Okay. Before we go to Shulchan Aruch, I'm sorry we didn't get to the laws today, but there's no point in going through the laws if you don't have the structure of Muktzeh. I just had ChatGPT quickly go over again another quick chart. Yes, Barbara.
That's okay. I can wait just a little bit while you go over this chart, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay, so let's just go. This is a chart based on what we just learned before in the Chabad.org. So category, Muktzeh due to prohibited use. Okay, utensils, items whose primary use is forbidden on Shabbos. Examples: writing tools, appliances not used on Shabbos. Tools forbidden for work. Tools forbidden for forbidden work. Okay, may be moved to use for to use it for a permitted purpose. Okay, so he kind of takes out things that wasn't so clear in the Chabad.org. That's why I'm happy to have done it and to go over it. For instance, like I said, if you're going to use a hammer or something else to crack open a nut on Shabbos, so that's permissible, although the primary use of a hammer is to knock in nails. But if you pick it up to use it to break to break a walnut, that's permissible, and therefore you're allowed to also move it to use its location. Notes: Muktzeh because its usual use is forbidden on Shabbos. Okay, that's why it's Muktzeh, because its primary use is forbidden. But if you have uses that are permissible, or you needed space because it has uses that are permissible, if you're going to use it for something that's not primary, therefore you can move it for its space. Muktzeh due to value. Valuable items handled only for specific functions, never used for anything else. So examples: expensive electronics or professional tools that you wouldn't use to crack open a nut because it's too expensive may not be moved at all. Items set apart because of value, not moving, value, no moving even for location or protection. So if you have an expensive, again, this is talking about hand use, elbow use, feet use is something different. Muktzeh by definition, items that have no ordinary Shabbos use at all: rocks, money, lumber, soil, vegetation, edible foods, animals cannot be moved at all. No common Shabbos use inherently set aside, because it means Muktzeh means in your mind you now have a use of it, it's set aside. Items used for permissible activities, items whose primary use is permitted on Shabbos: cutlery, etc. Plates could be used, permitted to move even for no special need, but not for frivolous reasons. Okay, books, people, etc. Not muktzeh inherently allowed. Food, drinks, sidurim, people always allowed to move it. Can be moved for any purpose. Can be moved for any permitted purpose. So the difference between foods, drinks, sidurim, and people versus cutlery. Cutlery you can't just toy with your fork for no reason, just to walk around with it and flip it in your fingers. Whereas just to pick up a book or an apple for no reason is allowed. Okay, the reason for your handling of an object affects whether it's permitted, even if it would otherwise be muktzeh. To use an object for an activity allowed on Shabbos, to use the place where the object is lying, to protect the object from the object from being damaged. So again, 1, 2, and 3 have to fall into the chart depending on what it is. Special muktzeh principles. Muktzeh can be touched but not moved. Touching without movement is allowed. In other words, touching a tree. Moving with a body, foot, or elbow allowed. In other words, nudging with foot because it's not the hand. Basis, ledavar aser, if it becomes a support. If a non-muktzeh item supports a muktzeh item that was deliberately placed before Shabbos, not by forgetting it, the base becomes muktzeh too and may not be moved. Exceptions to the base rule: if you intended to remove the muktzeh before Shabbos, so you forgot it there. If the muktzeh item sat randomly, not intentionally. If the base support another non-muktzeh item of greater value than the muktzeh item, so like the chalas or the siddur. A repulsive muktzeh in living area may be moved, like a diaper. Dangerous muktzeh, like broken glass, may be moved. Yom Tov rule: some rules of Shabbos, same as the rules of Yom Tov are same as Shabbos. Plus items that get a new function, noilad on Yom Tov is osir. That's the laws of Beitza in the Masechta. May remain muktzeh even if they could be moved on Shabbos. Quick summary: non-muktzeh objects, food, books, everyday utensils may be moved freely. Muktzeh objects are generally not moved unless you have permitted purpose. Like we said before, value-based and intrinsic muktzeh are strict, no moving except in special circumstances, all based on Chabad.org. Okay, so that basically covers all the background. What do you want to ask, Barbara?
When we were talking last night, and I was telling you about the kosher class I'm taking, and I wanted to just ask a quick question because
Sure.
we were talking about cooking fish and meat and using fish sauces. Don't use those with meat, but some Jews have the custom to have like lox and cream cheese, lox, bagels, and cream cheese. Does Chabad allow dairy with fish?
Yeah, this is a longer answer, but the in the short, yes, we do have bagels and lox. The problem with the meat and the fish and the milk, if you look in the text of the Shulchan Aruch, was based on sakana, of that it was dangerous, it was a bad combination, unhealthy. So in certain today, bagels and lox. There are certain scenarios where it's not permitted, and depending on what kind of cheese is, what kind of dairy it is, and in what state the fish is. But bagels and lox is something that today I don't believe. Maybe some people, maybe some specific people are strict, but in Chabad we're definitely not. I
Okay,
mean, I
thank you.
can't speak for everyone in Chabad, but it is common to go to a Chabad event, a Chabad house event that will serve bagels and lox, and most Jews eat bagels and lox.
With
The
cream cheese.
Sephardim don't.
Who?
The Sephardim don't have fish and cheese together.
They still keep to even bagels and lox? Even the
I'm not sure about everybody, but I know some they're still machmir about it.
Okay, so there you go. Z says
Because of Shulchan Aruch.
yeah. Rebecca, you wanted to ask something? You're on mute.
Yeah. What about like looking through a photo album on Shabbos or handling photographs on Shabbos just because you want to look at them or show them to a relative? Are those muktzah?
Okay, first of all, we talked about Bechlal, the laws of we're not talking about reading, let's say, non-Jewish magazines, right? Which are not Shabbostic. But family photos, I would not believe falls under that. I think that falls under what we said over here in the chart, books. Didn't say Sfarim specifically. That has to be Sifrei Kodesh. Let me just see what it says over here in Chabad.org. What was it in category over here? Yeah. Yeah, it's books. Yeah, books are allowed. It's like, it's part of to pick up a book is allowed, and to pick up and a photo frame, I think, would fall under that. I think
Okay.
it's not part of that would be part of owning Shabbos. It's not a
Um,
halacha.
and also I don't know if this is like if the problem here is muktzah, but I've seen like even like from families, like the kids play board games on Shabbos that have like fake money. Is that okay?
Okay, that's an excellent question. Playing Monopoly on Shabbos. There's a discussion on that. Monopoly is fake. It's not that okay, it's not so simple. And I don't want to give just a blank ruling. I want to look at it more, see what the detailed opinions on this is. But there's definitely a discussion about playing Monopoly, let's say, versus Risk or chess.
Okay, thank you.
Barbara, your hand is up. You have a second question?
Yeah, what about we can't use writing instruments, but what if we wanted to play Scrabble? Would that be allowed?
That's another excellent question on Shabbos because you'd be forming letters and words on Shabbos. I want to check on board games. I want to get more specific. I don't want to just talk on top of my head. I want to check the different opinions on that, and we'll discuss in more detail in the next class.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everyone. I think this covers again. We only got to one law about the foods that are asr b'achila mutter b'hana, and it belongs to you that you're allowed to move it. You're allowed to give it. You're allowed to move it because if you wanted to, you could give it. It's yours to give to non-Jew. And Be'ez Hashem, starting from next week, after we got the background on Muktzeh, we'll start with Sif number Sif Dalid, which deals with the laws of Noilid, which is what we discussed. The ideas of things that come into existence, so to say, on the Shabbos. Thank you. Z posted for those who are on the chat, posted the link about the Shulchan Aruch Harav he quotes on dairy and milk cheese. So if you want to look at more of that, let's see quickly. Barbara, that would be something good to look at. The laws of cheese and milk together. Sorry,
Okay,
cheese and fish together.
okay. Thank you so much, Rabbi. I really appreciate you doing this class.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining Laila Tov.
A little.